Okay, so after adjusting the margins for the page to be 1-inch margins, what we can also adjust are the line spacings and the paragraph skippings and whatnot. Notice that the reference, everything gets taken care of by our bib LaTeX package. All of that gets taken care of. The spacing within our figures, notice that over here, that because our source fits within the line, we're not able to get a line break for our source yet. Okay, and notice that we have the same thing on over on the Capricorn procedure, that for our source there's no line break because the space taken is now less than a line. Okay, but how can I adjust my line spacing? And in particular, notice that we actually have indentations for our paragraphs, right? That if I had no space between a particular line and another line, the information would set up here as a single sentence, right, with the indentation for the first paragraph. If there was no line in between this citation and a really interesting result, when we recompile, notice that it's going to keep everything on the same line. Okay, and if I put no spacing between these as well, the citation, and also look at the URL, when I do that, right now, also look at the URL and a really interesting presentation. Now those are all part of the same paragraph, right? And it doesn't matter if I'm on separate lines, if there is no line in between, no blank line in between, or check out and how to insert a figure, right? With a blank line, these are presented on separate lines, but without a blank line, they are not presented on separate lines. Okay. Now, one way I can control that is to use the double backspace to create a line break. So now how to insert a figure is on its own line. And if I want to adjust how much space there is in that line break, I can set up the space of an M for 1M. But if I then also create a line in between, that space is now going to be increased and it's going to see it as a new paragraph, right? So if I don't have a space between, it's seen as part of the same paragraph, but I have a line space with the break, which may be something that I want to have. But there's going to be an easier way to control all of those items, okay? An easier way to control all of those items. So right now we're going to see that, hey, basically we just have one long paragraph. And the way that I'm going to be able to control those items is to use my set space package, use package set space. That'll allow me to adjust line spacing. And then I'm going to set the length for my paragraph indent. And that length for my paragraph indent is going to be 0.0 inches. In other words, no indentation to start a new paragraph. I could adjust that as needed. Right? I will also have my set length par skip, which is for paragraph skip, that it will give me a 1M. It'll give me the line spacing when starting a new paragraph, and I can make that line spacing larger or smaller as needed. Right? And then lastly, set stretch with the input of 1 allows me to adjust the line spacing for the document. So set stretch gets used by package set space, and it allows me to set my line spacing. If I want 1.5 line spacing, I can use 1.5. If I want less line spacing, I can use less. So now if I recompile, you should see that there's really no difference to my work other than I don't have an indentation now, right? And of course, if I came over here to say 0.5 inch for my indentation on a new paragraph, I would have that indentation of 0.5 inch. If I used 1.5 on my set stretch, now what I will see is that my stretch is at 1.5. right? And if I were to come over and let's say after a really interesting thing, if I came over and pressed enter, now that's saying this is a paragraph break, right? Because I have a line between my citation and a really interesting result. So now when I look, right, I have that additional 1M in addition to that 1.5 line skip to create this new paragraph. And so I have this indentation that I have the new paragraph. And I could do the same thing with or check out. And now I'm going to have, hey, and here is a new paragraph with the 1.5 line spacing. Okay. Now, of course, if I come back and I change this to 0.0 inches for my paragraph indent, now I have no indentation for each new paragraph, which within mathematical writing is a fairly common approach. Right? And once again, if I come and adjust the 1.5 line spacing, which is pretty common for writing in mathematics, if I adjust it to a 2, now this is going to be double spaced. Right? So we can look at our work. There we have things double spaced. Generally speaking, with a 12-point font, double spacing is a little bit much, but with an 11-point font, double spacing is less. So we can talk about, well, how can I adjust the font size? Well, on document class, I can come in and say, let me make sure it's a 12-point font and make sure that I'm using letter paper. Okay, so that's going to be the 8.5 by 11. I could say A4 paper, and that's going to be the British A4, which is slightly different from 8.5 by 11. There's a really interesting um, reason that British paper is the dimensions that it is, and it has to do with the golden ratio. Awesome to check out. But notice what's going to happen if I change my 12-point font. Then I can come in and you'll notice that the font size got a little bit larger because the standard for LaTeX is an 11-point font. Technically on the menu, you can come in and you can adjust your font size for different things, right? But we don't really need to go through and discuss, the downloading of different pieces there, but you could do it with the menu. So 12-point font is going to be our standard, but if you don't define anything, it's actually in an 11-point font. Okay, 11-point font looks fine, but 12-point font is technically the font size that we'd want you to use. And for the line spacing, 1.5 line spacing is generally appropriate for the line spacing. If you want to indent your paragraphs, you can, but it's not required for you to indent your paragraphs. So we can see our setup for everything that we have. And notice once again that in our figure over here, we don't have the line break, but I want to see if creating a V-space would let me get a line break. Let's try this out and try to force a line break in my figure. And it doesn't seem that I can do that without additional items within my figure, and that's okay. All right, but we can see, right, that I have the Capricorn procedure and the source all fits on one line, so we can leave it in that form. And down here, right, I can see my spacing is off, right, so I can take away that line break, that I would need to use another package to force the line break, but for right now, just trying to keep things simple, so we'd be able to have this, right? And once again, this hyper setup, that allows for the coloring of our hyperlinks, right? So we can see that I have a hyperlink there, but if I take away this hyper setup by using the percent symbol that says to ignore that code, when I come in, right? Now, my links are still there, right? I still have a link. I still have a link. I still have a link. My links are still there, but I do not have my hyperlink set up. Okay. What I can do, right, is at the very minimum say color links to be true, and that will allow me to automatically color my hyperlinks. Okay. So there are other things that I could use for coloring my hyperlinks. The link color blue, link border, but that has more to do with when you're running your Python code and doing other things. So if you want your hyperlinks to be in various colors, you need to do hyper setup, color links true, and when I click on one, it'll take me to my reference, right? If I click over here, take me to where I am with my reference. And I'll be able to have each of those items, right? And here takes me to the hyperlink of the particular citation. So interesting pieces for adjusting the spaces. You don't need to use yet, but eventually we will expect you to use. All right, and once again, the set stretch 1.5 is fine, 1.25 is fine. 2, I think, is a little bit much, but you're welcome to use 2 double line spacing, but as well, single line spacing is acceptable. Only thing is with single line spacing, if you have inline mathematical text, you may see adjustments in the spacing. So 1.5 may be a nice place to go initially. Right. Thank you very much for your time.